it's so important, and so it's really up to us to do that. There's a concept that I wanted to share with you in the Jain religious tradition. That's one that I was born into and raised, and it's called Anekantvad, and that basically translates loosely to considering a multiplicity of views. And the truth is complex, and its attainment must be from many different facets. It's our duty to explore those facets and use the framework of ahimsa and nonviolence, of compassion and respect, seeking and living the truth, humility of our place in this much greater world, purity of our thoughts and our actions and our words, and detachment from our desires and our egos. It's really to find and act on the best possible path forward. So these happen to be the basic philosophical precepts of the Jain religion. In terms of our path forward, let's get to our panel. We have a great illustrious panel here today. We have 4 individuals, and I'm going to tell you the order here. So we have Damien Mander, we have Nora Constance Marino, we have Anna Eskamani, and Jaya Bumitra. So let's firstly give them all a round of applause. And I'm going to give you an introduction for Damien. So Damien Mander is an anti-poaching activist and the founder of the International Anti-Poaching Foundation. He's a former Australian Royal Navy clearance diver and Special Operations military sniper. He's also a director of the Conservation Guardians. His anti-poaching and environmental work has been featured in National Geographic, Africa Geographic, 60 Minutes, The Guardian newspaper, BBC, and there's a countless number of others. He has a TEDx Sydney presentation called Modern Warrior. He's featured in Unity. How many of you seen the film documentary Unity? Definitely some of you. Obviously making it accessible to many. He's also appeared in the documentaries Vegan 2018, The Game Changers. How many of you seen The Game Changers? Great movie. Actually premiered here at the Environmental Film Festival last year in DC. It's spectacular. And The Last of the Long Necks. Please, let's welcome Damien Mander.
Thank you. Conquering everything in his path, Yasate, commander of Genghis Khan's special forces, reported, "We don't need more generals. When the hour of crisis arrives, always remember that 40 well-selected men can shake the world." This was the quote written across the wall in the briefing room when I arrived for day 1 of Special Forces, and I'd graduated into what is the ultimate boys' club. You can be the president of a country and be a woman, but you cannot be special operations. I joined the Navy as a clearance diver, Australia's version of America's SEALs, and after September 11 went on to serve as a special operations sniper with Tactical Assault Group East, a unit of 50 men that were there as Australia's first and last resort for a terrorist attack on home soil. Deployed to Iraq for 3 years. One role there that I fulfilled was as project manager for the Iraq Special Police Training Academy, training and deploying battalion-sized groups of 700 paramilitary forces across the country. A lesson I learnt there is that you cannot send foreign forces to foreign lands and expect to have a long-term good relationship with the local population. I left Iraq, and not to take anything away from the real victims of the Iraq War, which are the Iraqi people, but for many of us who go to those sort of situations and you're working within these units, you're part of a brotherhood, and when that stops, your purpose finishes. And you've got to try and figure out how to reintegrate yourselves back into life. And I can say this here in America, where 22 US veterans a day commit suicide. It's tough. There's no job for a sniper in the local newspaper when you get back home, guys. I still do cash jobs if anyone's interested. I'd heard about anti-poaching about a decade earlier, and it sounded like a romantic adventure. And I bought a one-way ticket to Africa. Started working with Ranger units. It was only going to be a 6-month adventure for me. I joined the military not to serve my country, I did it for adventure. I went to Iraq to make money, not to help the situation. And when I came to Africa, I was looking for a fight, not a cause. And there's a couple of things that happened to me. The first was being inspired by Ranger teams that have given up everything in their lives to be out there on the front lines, defending the natural world with their lives. I'd come from working within a $600 billion a year annual defence budget, looking after resources in the ground and dotted lines on the map. And here were these people protecting the heart and lungs of the planet, and I was trying to have an adventure on the back of their hard work, maybe reflect on who I was as a person, and I wasn't happy with what I saw. The second thing that I saw that inspired me was animals. Animals don't want a car or a house or a paycheck. Animals want one thing. They want to live. And we as a species continually take that away from them. And the two things I had in this world were money and a shitty set of skills, and I decided to do something with those two things. Liquidated a property portfolio, and in 2009 set up the International Antipoaching Foundation. We scaled programs working in the same way we'd worked in the military, and that was to be direct action, the last line of defence for animals, going out there and putting well-trained people with weapons between those animals, and, such as rhino and elephant, that have been hunted for their tusks and their horns, to be sold into organised crime syndicates, and we put people out there to protect those animals, to risk their life. We scaled large operations that involved over more than the biggest one, 165 people, helicopters, aeroplanes, canine attack dogs, drones. And I started to realise that on a continent that's going to have 2 billion people by 2040, we were further away from the age-old cliche of winning in the hearts and minds than I'd ever wanted to be. We were having a war with the local communities, and it wasn't the way to operate. We were being successful, but it wasn't sustainable. We started to look at other industries. Conservation is an industry that's dominated by men, and women are outnumbered on the front lines by around 100 to 1. In a world where empowering women is the single greatest force for positive change today, it made us... We're seeing other industries progressing by getting more women onto the boards, more women into management positions, more women as CEOs, and we weren't doing that. And I started to wonder, if we can't progress as an industry, we're still going to be sitting here talking about animals going extinct. And that's not what I signed up for. We wanted to look outside the box. We looked at other programs where women were given certain access, but not all access. We're thinking about changing that. May 2017, I read an article in the New York Times about the US Army Rangers training women and deploying them onto the front lines. Now, for you guys, that's a nice story. For me, it's a little more personal. On a routine mission in northern Baghdad in 2007, a decade before reading this article, our convoy was blown up. A couple of people killed, and we were quickly surrounded. We hit the emergency buttons in the vehicle, and within 2 minutes there was 2 Apache gunships circling our position. And 5 minutes later, the US Army Rangers came and got us out of there alive. That should have been my last day, but it wasn't. A decade later, reading that article, I'm thinking, if the unit that was good and gracious enough to ensure that I'm still standing here talking here today, if they're training women to be US Army Rangers, maybe women can be wildlife rangers as well. How do I make my slides go up? There they go. We set out to start recruitment and training in an industry that's dominated by men. In a patriarchal society, we had to sit with the chief and try and convince them that this is a good idea. Eventually they gave us 3 days. Okay, 3 days in an abandoned trophy hunting reserve. We tried in 7 other places and nobody else wanted to take the risk. Trophy hunting is a dying industry on the African continent. There are less animals to shoot. There are tougher laws and policies surrounding the export of certain trophies, such as ivory, to America. And there's a generation raised on social media that just doesn't want to get on a plane anymore and fly across the world to shoot something in the face. What this means is where trophy hunting has been used as an economic model, it is no longer sustainable. And these areas will be lost, and along with it, the millions, if not billions, of animals of all different shapes and sizes that inhabit these areas, the trees, the water that flows, they'll be settled, they'll be turned into grazing areas, mining areas. We wanted to look at trophy hunting as an equation to be solved rather than an argument to be had. This area that we started this program, it had nothing going there, and it was about to be settled by the local community. It would have been lost forever. And the chief agreed to allow us into this area to do a 3-day trial. And we sent out word to the local community, and we advertised to have women that were survivors of serious sexual assault, domestic violence, AIDS orphans, single mothers and abandoned wives. 87 women came forward for selection. Now, I've built a career across 3 continents by bringing hardened men to the point of breaking and then rebuilding them into what we need on the front lines. And not once ever in any country or any operation did one woman feature in that equation. So this was very new to me. Halfway through day 1 of training these women, we knew we had something very special, something that I hadn't seen before. The distance that a person can place between suffering and breaking is what defines the spirit of an individual, defines character. I don't need good CVs. I need scrappers. I want fighters. I want people that know what it's like to have to fight to survive, and I can train the rest. And that's exactly what we got with these women. I'd done a recruitment for 189 men in 2012, and at the end of day 1, only 3 were left. At the end of day 3 with these women, only 3 had pulled off voluntarily. Wow. And the focus very quickly shifted from them proving to us that they are worthy of being trained to us, are we worthy to train them? I'm happy to say that 2 years later, the women have broken open stereotypes, enabled social re-engineering in these communities that have been dominated by men, made 110 arrests, driving a message across the African continent of what is possible. Some of the things that we've seen with this program is corruption, a lack of corruption. Zimbabwe sits 165 out of 185 countries on the Global Corruption Index. If you can go there and remove corruption from any equation, you're already halfway home to achieving what you want to achieve. Historically, with men, we would have to recruit from around the country so they're not influenced by the local population, the people that grew up with. The biggest line items in our budget are ranger salaries, so that was being dispersed around the country. Not having corruption with women means we can employ 100% from the local community. It turns the largest line items in our budget into a direct community investment that's not going in at council level or chief level. It's going in at household level into the hands of women who spend 3 times more on their family than what men do. We are currently putting the same amount into the local community every 34 days as what trophy hunting was able to do per annum. We have a viable economic alternative to trophy hunting that only works with women at the centre of the model. Women naturally de-escalate tension. My background is counterinsurgency warfare. We're looking for a fight to finish. Women want to have a conversation. I don't know what the problem is first before they shoot it. What this means for us is a far less militarised operation. We don't have helicopters, we don't have gunships, aeroplanes, canine tracking units and drones. We are having interpersonal relationships with the local communities from which these women came from. In the 16 years before our arrival into this program, into this area, the Lower Zambezi ecosystem, there were 8,000 elephants killed. 8,000 times teams of armed men moved into this area willing to kill elephants or the people that were protecting them. I can say now, after 2 years of this program, there's been an 80% reduction in elephant poaching in the Lower Zambezi. And we now have 5 reserves that span 1.5 million acres as we drive this program across the continent. The ecosystems that balance our climate and make life on Earth are under extreme threat. Okay? Unless there's sufficient action, okay, life on Earth as we know it will cease. Along with humankind, millions of species will be taken to extinction. There's never been a more critical issue in civilization than the immediate protection of the natural world. Putting women at the centre of the conservation strategy is a simple yet innovative solution which can shift development, philanthropy and empowerment across the African continent. From what I've now learned, I believe that women will change the world for the better. And as we scale towards 1,000 women by 2025, protecting Africa's largest and most iconic ecosystems, I can't think of a more empowering program to drive this model, to drive this message. What excites me about this program is the possibilities. We went into a small landlocked country in sub-Saharan Africa in a conservation industry that's becoming increasingly antagonistic with local indigenous communities on a continent that's had a 700% increase in armed conflict in the last decade. All we did was shift male roles to construction and labour and put women into the power roles of law enforcement, decision-making and management. In doing so, we cut our operational costs by 2/3. The remaining third becomes the most effective form, invested into women, becomes the most effective form of community development, and our conservation programs, which is our core business, have become more successful than ever. Now, this is possible in Zimbabwe. What's possible beyond Zimbabwe? What's possible beyond conservation? Ultimately, this program is not the evolution of women to fulfill conservation's toughest roles. It's the evolution of men to see something we should have seen a long time ago. I can't take back the past, and I'm not going to be trapped by it either. In this circumstance, nothing makes me happier than to say we were wrong. The past 2 years have been a steep learning curve, operationally and ideologically. And the women, they continue to display a certain toughness. It's a calm resilience I'm yet to understand, and perhaps some things in life are best left unexplained. What I do know is that it's working better than anything I've seen before. And women, if given the opportunity, will save much, much more than Africa's ecosystems. For so long, we've been clouded by our egos from seeing the most powerful force in nature, and that is a woman's instinct to protect. Where history is scarred with the battlefields of ego, women have remained the mothers, providers and protectors of families. Binding society together, they bring stability to chaos, their nations. 7 centuries since Genghis Khan's men shook the world, it's now been shaken again by a very different kind of force, a special force. Women, thank you. And I'm very sorry I have to go, but thank you all so much. Huge amount of respect for what you stand for. There isn't a massive animal rights or vegan movement going on in Africa, so the energy that I take back from here when I fly back tomorrow is because of you. And thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Damien, for great thoughts and all the work you do. Spectacular.